Could this be the first Windows laptop that matches the MacBook Air? I've got two very important questions for it. Back in June, I travelled to Taipei to check out the Snapdragon X Elite chip, which is a big deal. It's a brand new ARM processor which is going into lots of Windows laptops and in theory should make Windows laptops finally as good as the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. I know immediately lots of Windows people are heading into the comments section and calling me an idiot, but I don't care. I used to be a Windows person. Honestly, I used to spend years dealing with Windows and sometimes enjoying it. I built Windows PCs, I played games, proper games on Windows machines that I built, and I lost most of my hair during that process. Then I discovered the Mac, and, well, the hair had gone by that point, but it was just a dream. And it was a dream because it just worked. And these days we have the M series chips, which are just brilliant and very, very good in terms of battery life, performance. You know, the performance you get now for the money you spend on a MacBook, which is expensive. I know that they're still expensive computers, but the stuff you get back in terms of performance and just the longevity, that they last forever. Let me stop waffling on about MacBooks, because if you've come to this video, you've come to hear about my thoughts on the Surface, let me get this right, the Microsoft Surface Laptop 7th edition, which I will just call the Surface Laptop from here because that's just easier. And spoiler, I really like it. But I do have two questions for it. The first one is, what's the battery life like? That is so important. And the second one is it as good as a MacBook Air? But first, a very quick word from today's sponsor, which is RoboForm. Now, if you're still storing passwords in a spreadsheet or on Post-it notes or just in your head somewhere, please stop. You need a password manager, and RoboForm is basically the most affordable and the most usable one I've found so far. We use it in this business and it is utterly brilliant. You can store everything in there, from your login details for your favorite websites, your favorite web apps, to your secret notes you don't want anyone to see. Basically anything digital that you don't want to get into the wrong hands, put it in RoboForm. And yes, they have a completely no breach history, which is what matters in this game. It just makes everything so easy. So if you've got an existing website you need to log into, you can use the one-click login feature to choose that website, click once, and bang, you're in. If you're signing up to a new website, RoboForm will suggest the password for you, which will be very secure, and it will automatically save it for future use. And there's an emergency access feature, so if the worst happens and you can't get into your passwords for whatever reason, you can give the access to your RoboForm database to someone you trust. But the best news is it's very, very affordable, and it's even more affordable if you use my link, because I've got a massive discount for you, which is simply unbelievable. Just click that link down below and enjoy. Let's go through the specs and the pricing of this particular laptop. So the one that I've been sent to review is the 13.8-inch display version. It's got the Snapdragon X Elite chip inside with 16 gig of RAM, 512 gig of storage. It's Dune, which is the color. It's like this kind of, it's gold basically, but it's a very nice shade of gold. This particular model will set you back £1,449, and the equivalent MacBook Air, the M3 version, which you can buy now, is about it's £1,499. So there's a 50 quid difference between this and the MacBook Air. It basically means this needs to perform. But there are two sizes to choose from, so if you don't want the 13.8 inch, if this isn't quite big enough for you, there is a 15-inch version of the new Microsoft Surface laptop, and there's two chip choices. So there's the X Elite, which is in this one, and the X Plus. It can get quite confusing with the configuration options. I've got them noted down here. So the X Elite, which is this one, can come in either 16 or 32 gig of RAM and 512 or 1 terabyte of storage. The X Plus, which is the slightly downgraded chip, it has 10 cores versus the 12 cores in this one. That is 16 gig of RAM only, and you can get 256 or 512 gig of storage. So those are your two options basically. The most you can spend on this is £2,149 if you spec out that 15-inch version with the Snapdragon X Elite. So again, it can get quite expensive. In terms of everything else, it's got two USB-C ports, it's got one USB-A port, which is such a hangover from 1995, but I love the fact that Windows machines still have USB-A ports. It's brilliant. There's one charging port, which is obviously Microsoft's own, and it's a little bit like MagSafe, so it does come out quite easily if your kid runs across and trips over your cable, which is nice. There's a 1080p webcam, it's Wi-Fi 7 compatible, and it runs Windows 11 Home. The least you can spend on this if you go for the Snapdragon X Plus chip is £1,049, which is still a lot of money. I know I keep saying that, but this isn't a cheap laptop, and again, it needs to perform. Okay. Design. What does this remind you of? If we look at this design here, which is this kind of wedge shape, it reminds me of something. What is it? Oh yeah, the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air that we all love and is no longer purchasable from Apple. Now this Surface Laptop 7 is lighter than the previous version, which I don't have to hand to test, so I'm sure that must be true. Why would it not be? That's good, and it feels very good. The build quality is very solid, and you can do the one-handed lift of the lid, which you can't always do with Windows laptops. You can with the MacBook. That's been one of the great things about the MacBook. And it does matter. Trust me. You can, but just doing this, immediately that makes me feel at home. I do like the color choices as well. I do like this dune color. It's not garish. It looks, I think, even on camera, yes, it does smudge, as you can see, not quite as bad as the Midnight MacBook Air, but it does look really professional and upmarket, and just it looks like you've spent a decent amount of money. I keep talking about the money in this review, but it's so important. The keyboard is one of the best I've used. It's just lovely to type on. I've done so much writing on this thing. I don't really want to give it up. It's such an enjoyable keyboard to type on. And we have shut up. We have a haptic trackpad, just like the MacBook. So this isn't a proper clicky thing. It's basically, it does something to your brain where you feel like it's clicking, but it's not. It's haptic feedback. And that means it's very responsive and you can click anywhere. Moving on to the display, and I realised that I didn't mention this at all during the spec readout. So basically it's 2K resolution. It's got 600 nits of peak brightness. The previous laptop 6, I suppose it was called, that had 400 nits, so it's quite a big upgrade. It's got a 120 Hz variable refresh rate and Dolby Vision support. It's not quite as sharp and vibrant as the MacBook Air, to be honest, and it's nowhere near as good as the Huawei MateBook 14. The display on this is wonderful, but it's still very good, and it's touchscreen. Now, some people don't get this at all, but I love the fact that I can reach out and touch this screen. And whenever I go back to my MacBook Air after using this, I keep trying to touch that Retina screen, which isn't a good idea. It's great. And Windows is built for it. Performance we can do very quickly. Now, this is running the Snapdragon X Elite chip, and it's brilliant. Now, bearing in mind, I don't do any kind of benchmarks. Me saying it's brilliant it's not the best kind of yardstick for this, because you do need some numbers to back this up, and there's loads of people who have done all sorts of benchmarks and things. So go and check those out if you're bothered about that. If you're not bothered about that, what I can tell you is that this feels identical to a MacBook Air in everyday use. So if you're just scooting around the operating system and writing stuff and replying to emails and using the web and doing Zoom calls and all that sort of stuff, it's so buttery smooth. However, I think the buttery smooth operation is a combination of the chip, the screen, so the 120 Hz variable refresh rate on this display, which is, well, you don't get it on the MacBook Air. You get that on this, but you don't get it on the MacBook Air. That's a big plus for this. And that trackpad, that haptic trackpad, which is the best Windows trackpad I've used. Those three things, I think, are what make this feel so enjoyable to use. Now, I tested this. Well, I didn't do any kind of battery tests because, again, I don't do that sort of thing. But what I did do was just use it normally. The battery life, just to put this into context, for me, is one of the main reasons I fell in love with that M1 MacBook Air. It was just unbelievable. The thing went on for seemingly days and days. But the most important thing was the standby time. Now, Microsoft promises 20 hours of video playback with this one. The 15-inch version gets apparently 22 hours, which sounds very impressive indeed. And that's with the screen brightness at about 50% and just doing regular stuff, writing, email, speaking to the team on Google Meet. What else do I use? Slack, WordPress, and all of the Google suite, Google Docs, Google Sheets, all that stuff. And that first day of use was a bit concerning because it went from 100% to 74% in just less than 2 hours of use. And then by midday, it had lost half of its battery life. It had 50% remaining. But then things changed because in the afternoon, I shot the footage of this laptop for this video. So the footage that you're seeing now was shot on that first day of use in the afternoon, and it seemed to improve. By the evening, so by 8 p.m, it still had 35% remaining. And I'd taken it home and done some more work on it as well. So I think possibly it might have been an indexing thing. I know when you set up a new laptop, it does lots of indexing and stuff behind the scenes. I'd purposefully left it left it running overnight before I started using it to get that indexing finished. Clearly it hadn't. And yes, I've done the overnight test. I charged it to 100%, unplugged it, closed the lid, came down in the morning at 6 a.m. or something, and it still had 100%. And that goes back to what I was saying about the convenience of having a laptop like the MacBook Air that barely loses any percentage points when you close the lid. So it passed that test with flying colours, and the battery life in general use does feel very MacBook-like. It's not quite there. It's not quite as good as the MacBook Air. It does feel like this is losing the battery percentage a little bit quicker, but it's still the best battery experience I've ever had on a Windows laptop. The next big thing to talk about is this Copilot. And the reason it's the next big thing to talk about is because this is called a Copilot Plus PC. Microsoft is putting loads behind this. The big question is, what is it? Let's ask Copilot itself. So what are you? Okay, ready?
I'm Microsoft Copilot, a conversational AI designed to assist you with a wide range of tasks and provide information. Whether you need help with productivity, have questions about various topics, or just want to chat, I'm here to help. How can I assist you today?
It's basically ChatGPT. And it is ChatGPT because ChatGPT-4 is the thing that powers Copilot. So if you've used ChatGPT, you've pretty much used Copilot. Now it does look different and it's built into Windows. It's an app that is there when you first open Windows and get into it, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it, which is nice, but it is ChatGPT. And that's pretty much all I can say about it at the moment. There's nothing specific really about Copilot that links into Windows, not that I've found anyway. It's a window into ChatGPT. And at the time of making this video, we don't have that with Apple at the moment because Apple Intelligence isn't a public thing yet. So again, it's one step ahead of Apple, but it is just ChatGPT. There is some other AI stuff built into this laptop for the camera system, and there was something called Recall, which has been recalled. But AI, you get Copilot, and Copilot is ChatGPT. And you know what? That's fine. I think manufacturers are getting obsessed with creating AI-driven stuff that most consumers and most users don't care about. Let's answer those two questions that I posed at the start of this video. The first one was, is the battery life any good? And the answer is yes, it's the best battery life I've ever used on a Windows laptop. The bar wasn't particularly high, admittedly, and it's not quite as good as the MacBook Air. It's just a notch away from that, if you excuse the pun, but it's still incredibly good. The second question was, I think, is it as good as the MacBook Air? And the answer to that is yes. If you use Windows, if you have to use Windows or you just enjoy using Windows, I'm not judging by the way, this is a very good choice. The chip is fantastic, the battery life is very good, the build quality is superb, the price I think is bang on, and look at it, it looks lovely. I've really enjoyed using Windows machines this year, and this is my current favourite. It's utterly brilliant. However, if you are a Mac person like me, let's be honest, and you want to know my updated thoughts on the current MacBook Air, keep watching for a link.